Welcome to session 27 of Living as Dying. My name is Tsering. Annie Zungmo and I will be facilitating today's session, along with guest speakers Annie Whitlocke, Julie StAubyn, and Sarah Wilkinson. Ross and Annie Shenpen are our tech support. We begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and other lands, and recognise their connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Today's session on Chapter 12, What to Do After Death, begins with a section on handling the corpse. I'll begin with reading Rinpoche's advice. You should probably follow your own culture's guidelines for handling the corpse. As I've already mentioned, the Tibetan tradition recommends that a corpse is left untouched for as long as possible after death and that it is not moved. If you can, try to leave the corpse where it is for 3 days or at least for a few hours. But as this is quite difficult to organize in the modern world, you may only be able to leave it alone for an hour or two. If this happens, don't panic. Just do your best to leave the body untouched for as long as is practical. People often ask why a body shouldn't be touched. While you are alive, your mind is more attached to your body than anything else in this world. When you are bumped into on the street, you can react by saying something to the person who bumped into you because you are alive. But once a person is dead, the living have no way of knowing how strongly the dead person's mind might react to their body being touched. And for the dead, the handling of their old body can be extremely unsettling. According to Tantra, your projections at death and after death will be more positive if your consciousness leaves through the upper part of the body, ideally the top of the head, the crown chakra. This is why Tibetan tradition recommends that the lower half of a corpse is not touched and that people do not sit or stand near it. Relatives and friends should stand near the head of the corpse and to one side, not directly in front of it. This is also why Tibetan teachers advise you to touch the top of a dead person's head before anyone else touches the body. And many of us are familiar with this and touch the crown lightly if we are with a dying person or an animal. If the dead person's family are open to the idea, you could suggest placing a tugdrol on the corpse, but this is just a suggestion, not a must. The tugdrol, Rinpoche mentions here, is the method of liberation through touch, and it is usually placed over the heart chakra in the middle of the chest. It is often practiced by the living. Many people keep a tugdrol with them for protection while they are alive, but it can also be applied to dead bodies. You don't have to be dead to wear a tugdrol. If you're interested in applying this method, you'll find all the information you need on page 215, an image of a tugdrol chakra for you to photocopy and consecrate is on page 214. And we'll be having a workshop session a little later in the program on making the tugdrol. Ross and I always keep a few copies of the chakra image on hand for emergencies. In an emergency, it's fine just to place the image over the heart chakra of the deceased without the cloth covering. Placing a tugdrol on a corpse works well if you have devotion for and genuine belief in the method. But even if the dead person didn't believe in it or was aggressively anti-spiritual, as long as the person who places the tugdrol on the corpse is motivated by love, compassion, and bodhicitta, it will have a beneficial effect. We are fortunate to have Julie StAubyn, funeral director and member of our Living as Dying team, and death doula Annie Whitlocke here today to speak from their experience on handling the body of the deceased. Julie, would you like to begin?
Yeah, sure. I'm speaking from the point of view of the traditional funeral director working in a funeral directing business, so that is my main experience. So I thought it might be good to talk about taking as much time as you possibly can from the time that the person dies to when you actually call the funeral director, because that's the time that you have available to say your goodbyes, to get your affairs in order, and if you want to actually wash and clothe the deceased person. Take as much time as you need, because there's absolutely no hurry. Often people contact a funeral director only at the time of their loved one dying. They don't plan ahead. Very few people in my experience planned ahead. That first point of contact was when the person had died. So you wouldn't really take that plan of action in any other thing in your life. You would plan ahead and you'd meet people ahead of time. So I always found that interesting. They might have picked up a brochure at the hospital. They might have heard from somebody else that was a good funeral director to make contact with. So often I'd get a call and we would go to a nursing home or a private home or a hospice to collect someone's loved one and bring them into care. So I always encourage people to be as prepared as possible before they make that call, and to do as much care for their loved one as they can before we were going to arrive. I'd also like to say that it's a very confronting thing to have a funeral director arrive, because it's really a time of goodbye. When I've arrived in various different places, most people are ready for that and often don't actually want to be there when you arrive. So that's not always the case. And I would always explain to people exactly what was going to happen once we were there. So I'll probably just talk about that a little bit. So we would arrive in our unmarked van and explain to the family exactly what we were going to do. And it isn't actually a very nice thing to see the trolley and the bags arrive and the labels and all those things. It is really confronting. So often people would leave the room or actually choose not to be there at all for that process. And in fact, when my own mother died, my sister and I left because we felt that we'd said goodbye and we didn't actually want to be there for Mum's removal from the room. But should you decide to stay there, I'll just explain the process briefly. So we usually have some paperwork that we need to do, and often people will have some sort of preparation in place already. They'll have clothes ready to be sent with the person, or they may have already washed and dressed their loved ones. So that's always really lovely. We do need to put tags on the people's wrists and feet with their name and date of death. And often paperwork will accompany us with the deceased person. So we then have to put the deceased person into the body bag and into the carry bag and then take them out on the trolley. So if you don't feel that you can do that you would find that too upsetting, then it's probably a really good idea to be in another room when that happens. But I always tried to give people as much time as they needed and talk them through the process and make them as comfortable as possible while being involved in that process. Did you want to say anything, Annie?
I think that when you say to put the body into the body bag, I also suggest sometimes if people have a shawl or a cover and they want to escort the body out, some people like to escort all the way as much as possible, and that they can actually put that cover over the body bag to sort of soften
Yes.
the effect.
Yes, yes. That's
And
for sure.
I think that it's really important, as you said, to let people know beforehand. So if someone dies in a nursing home, for example, usually they are given 12 hours to vacate that room.
Yeah.
And it's a really good idea to let them know beforehand that we're prepared to pay for an extra day if that's the situation, or we're going to need extra time to be with our loved one. And just to give them fair warning, that's pretty similar to in palliative care. And in hospital wards, to let people know that, well, these are the things that we want to do after our loved one has died.
Yes.
And it's very important for us that we're able to do this. I know that we were talking before about when someone, it's very common that I will help wash the dead person with their loved ones, because it's not always family. And, you know, there has been some unfortunate incidences that could have been avoided when people have a bit of conflict over earrings and rings and necklace and scarf. And it's always interesting how some people think that, well, no, so-and-so said that I could have it, and then obviously someone had heard something very different. And this can get quite messy and unnecessary. It can make a very, very sensitive, intimate time into a bit sort of yucky experience. So I would recommend that you don't just say to someone, you know, when I die, I want you to have it, write it down and hand out some copies. So, you know, a few people sort of know what your wishes are. Also, that and I would imagine that this is where you would play a big role, Julie, that when someone dies in hospital, especially if it's a young child or a baby, usually for a baby they'll have a cuddle cot. But if it's a young child or a teenager, or a young person or old person, and you want them to come home for a vigil, then usually like someone like Julie would be called to transfer from the hospital to the home, and then afterwards, when the washing of the body, whether or not people want that, is done, and then they can come afterwards. I'm not too sure how far you wanted me to get into this right now, Julie. You want to? I'll handball it over to you now.
Okay, all right. I guess I'll just finish with the technical side of things and then hand the more sort of personal care over to you. I have to say that arriving at a palliative care place and finding a person washed, wrapped, and with a flower on their chest is really a lovely way of meeting the family and seeing the care and love that's already being spent with that person. And they generally, we carry the deceased person out the front door in plain view of the world, because the feeling is that death is part of life. So there's no back doors or hidden sort of activity, which often happens in a nursing home, which I realise is because they don't want to upset the residents that have a friend die in front of them. So on the subject of the jewellery, etc., we would often have to ask about whether teeth were going to be going with the person. If there was going to be a viewing, then obviously clothing. Jewellery was always something that needed to be recorded, and the funeral director will record if they collect someone from a care home or a hospital. They'll actually record whether someone's wearing white or yellow metal, so that later there isn't a dispute about whether any was with the person, and people can keep track of that. And it is a big issue. It does arise quite a lot, which is a bit sad. I'm just going to say that funeral homes are a business, so there's always a time constraint, and time is money. So you may be confronted with things like, now that your loved one has died, would you like us to transport them before 5 o'clock? because if you're transported after hours, you will pay another $500. And that it's bad to have to even mention this, but that is something that can be quite distressing for people, to find out that they've actually got this enormous bill. If you're lucky enough to be able to keep your loved one with you for a really long period of time, then you could, you know, that would work out fine. And obviously if someone's being transported over a long distance, then you're going to be charged accordingly. When the person comes to collect the dead person, they're generally somebody who's already got lots of other jobs to do. So by the time you've rung us, hopefully you are ready for us to take your loved one with us. Just look at my notes here. So once we've taken the person into our care and transported them, usually to the funeral home, then the paperwork is lodged, and should there be a cremation for the person, then we do have to let a separate doctor know, so that they can attend and check the person to make sure that the cause of death matches the cause of death of the original doctor. So there's two separate opinions, and you will be charged for that as a separate thing. Yeah, do as much or as little as you can manage, I guess, is my message. Some people really don't want to spend any time with a deceased person. They feel quite frightened of the body. That person that was their loved one for so many years becomes quite a frightening thing to be with. So I think we just have to be understanding and compassionate to where that person's at the time, and not put our values or ideas on them. I think that's really important, to not to push people beyond that comfort zone. And when people go to the funeral home or the mortuary to spend time with their loved one in that institution, we would let them know what it was they're about to experience, that the body would be damp, that we would mop it with a cloth for the condensation, that they're going to be cold. They're not going to look the same as they did when they were alive. And we'd either stay with them or give that family time to be with them by themselves, depending on how they felt. And often we would have to spend some time with them first, just to get them comfortable with the idea of what is a really confronting thing. Yeah, I think that's about me.
Okay, so when I go in and someone has died, I always speak to that person first, and I call them by their name.
Yes.
And then I obviously acknowledge everyone else in the room. I get some sort of lay of the land to see what people would want. Some people have got a really long list of things that they would like to have done, and then some are just, they have no idea what to do, which is what Julie says is so important. When someone is actually in, say, palliative care or at home, and they're not expected to live for very long, it's a really wonderful act of kindness to get a funeral director in place and beforehand, because at the time of death, when someone like Julie comes, people are not always at their best. And so if things are in place beforehand, so one of the examples, as Julie mentioned before, is that you wouldn't expect to hop on a plane and go to America without booking a ticket. So it's a little bit similar. If you're going to choose a funeral director, perhaps, not to wait until the person dies and then you Google or you just ask someone quick, who do we get? Because you're only going to get one chance at this. So to make it as smooth and as peaceful and calm as possible. And there are ways around that. I've handed some resources to Tsering, and she'll be able to share those with you. I'm just thinking of what other things, or apart from the actual washing, when I wash a body, I always have 2 bowls of warm water on either side, so that, and also some people like to wash due to culture, generational issues. They like to start from the feet first. Some like to start from the head first. So I do not supervise in that respect. I go along with whatever they want. I usually start from the head going down, and I will have a bowl of water on either side, because I don't actually think that it's very nice to lean over the body to dunk the water in and to clean the towel to wash the body, and it can get a little bit clunky for other people as well, especially when people are down near the feet and they have to walk up and, you know, to use the warm water. I put the person's favorite essences in the water, so that there's some familiarity with the senses. And then if it's at home, or sometimes even in the hospital or the nursing home, and the person has, a woman in particular usually will have some hand creams, then I say, well, you know, after we've washed the body and we've dried it, we can put some hand cream on. And this can be a nice little sort of intimate act where there's that familiar scent, and that can also help calm a situation. I let people know that there is no hurry. So if beforehand, ideally, to say, don't hurry, because as Julie said, you know, like they're time poor. They've got a lot of things that they've got to achieve in that time. So to sit around your loved one, I mean, I've had many families just sit around and share a glass of wine and share the stories and listen to the music, to be with their loved one. And if they have them overnight, 2 days, 3 days, then to get a cooling plate or Techni ice. And some people say, well, I must be, I want a vigil for 3 days. And that's not always possible, depending on the state of the body. So I think, and also an act of kindness is to say that as long as everything's okay and people can manage it, then, you know, this is what I would like. But if it becomes difficult, don't have to go into great descriptions, people will know. And usually there will come a time when people will just say, okay, I'm ready now. I'm ready to let my loved one go. As I said, to document things, I'm just checking my notes to make sure that I've covered everything. I also consider modesty, so to have towels and plenty of towels handy. Sometimes there are certain physical conditions that the body emits fluids. So, and I let people know that this is all normal, but always to have a backup supply. When I turn the body over, then they can have, if they've died on their back, then they can have signs of lividity. So this is a normal pooling of blood on the body, but it can look quite traumatic when you see it for the first time, sort of bluish, purpley red marks. And also if someone has died on the side, and to let people know that this is all normal. As I said, plenty of towels is also for modesty. Some people don't want to touch the body. I don't insist. It's up to them. I encourage, if kids want to be there, that's fine. If the kids want to touch the body, or they want to sit in the corner and play with their iPad, it's all good. It's all good. This is normal. And I just keep on reminding people that there are no rigid rules here. The most important thing is the intention. So the intention is to honor this person as they came into earth, onto earth. So now they are leaving, and we honor them in a similar way. I think I've covered my 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Julie and Annie, for that really helpful information. And Annie, as she said, has kindly offered her paper on ritual washing of the body as a resource, as well as an easy to follow final checklist of all the things it's good to have in place before the time of death, and a paper on home-based death care, which is really well written and really easy to follow and would make most people feel relaxed about having a home death and the care that's needed. So now Rinpoche goes on to remind us about the importance of reading the Bardo instructions out loud. Traditionally, Tibetans guide the dead by reading the instructions from the Great Liberation through hearing in the Bardo and other similar texts. But what if the dead person did not believe in life after death or heaven and hell or a Bardo state? Would reading the traditional Bardo instructions out loud still make a difference? While we are alive, none of us can prove scientifically or conclusively that we will experience the Bardos after we die, but neither can we prove that we won't. Imagine what would happen if a person who had been convinced that there was no such thing as life after death were to wake up after death surrounded by the terrifying visions described in this book. Wouldn't even the smallest hint about where they are and what they should be doing be welcome? No matter what they did or didn't believe in life, the dying person has nothing to lose and everything to gain from hearing these instructions. However you die, violently or peacefully, whether you die in a hospital, at home, or on the street, and whether you die at the age of 90 or 19, something in these instructions for dying, death, and beyond will be useful for you. If one part doesn't help, another will. This is why we read the instructions over and over again. The dying person may not get it the first or second time around, but eventually they will. And unless you are a realized being who knows exactly what to do and when to do it, we ordinary beings have only this general advice to guide us. And we're so very fortunate to have the Bardo instructions available to us as recorded by Rinpoche and also set out clearly in chapter 10 of Living as Dying. And Rinpoche then goes on to speak about rituals and practices for the dead. Tibetan tradition suggests that the best time to offer the dead person help and to perform practices on their behalf is during the first 49 days after their death. If the dead person was a relative or a good friend, and particularly if they were a Dharma friend, it is important that you make offerings to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and sponsor rituals on their behalf. For those of us connected with Siddhartha's intent, this is easily arranged through Mr. Pema Wanchuk in our Delhi office. If you belong to another Sangha or church, there's usually someone you can ask to arrange this. Provision for sponsorship of prayers, pujas, and light offerings can be arranged beforehand through your will or with help of a Sangha friend after you have passed away. In our organization, smaller offerings are directed to Rinpoche's monks in his Labrang in Bir to carry out the prayers and offerings, and larger offerings are directed to the monks at Dewatang Monastery in Bhutan, where elaborate ceremonies of pujas such as Korwa Dongdruk are carried out for the deceased. And Pema Wanchuk usually arranges for the sponsored life offerings to be made in Bodh Gaya, the place of enlightenment. And Rinpoche goes on to say how we can do a lot for our deceased friends and loved ones ourselves by chanting mantras and performing rituals, such as the Buddha Amitabha practice included at the end of chapter 10 of the Bardo instructions, or practicing the Korwa Dongdruk, or offering sur. It's also good to practice the deceased person's own deity practice or Guru Yoga on their behalf if you have initiation into the same practice. And of course, reading the Bardo instructions as Rinpoche has set out how to do that each day immediately after the death. And Rinpoche goes on to say, if you are a tantrika and have received the appropriate empowerments, it is especially important that you perform whatever the tantric rituals you are familiar with that was designed for the dead or dying people. For instance, Red Avalokiteshvara, the Korwa Dongdruk practice hosted monthly by Sarah Wilkinson for Siddhartha's Intent Australia, and the Akshobhya practice. I'll now hand over to Annie Zongmo to introduce our guest speaker, Sarah Wilkinson, who is joining us all the way from London to speak about Chang Chok and Korwa Dongdruk practice.
Welcome, Sarah. Sarah's a Buddhist chaplain, volunteer, wife and mother who in her early 20s had a near-death experience that forever changed her perspective towards death and ultimately life. Sarah discovered the beauty and sensibility in the Buddhist approach to death and now finds immense satisfaction in easing people's discomfort about the inevitable journey facing us moment to moment. An ordained lay Buddhist minister, she earned a Master of Divinity in Buddhist chaplaincy in 2016. After some years in Hong Kong, Sarah completed a year-long program in clinical pastoral education at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney, Australia. She's further qualified as an end-of-life doula and has led a number of death cafes. After volunteering for several months as a spiritual caregiver at the Chris O'Brien Lifehouse, a cancer treatment centre, Sarah moved to London, where she now volunteers as a chaplain for the NHS in the oncology ward at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. In addition to leading the monthly practice of Korwa Dongdruk, a Tibetan Buddhist ritual to benefit the deceased for Siddhartha's intent, she works for Kensey Foundation in editing, identity development and communications, and is a board member of Lotus Outreach International. Thanks for joining us, Sarah. And Sarah's going to begin with reading Rinpoche's comments about the Chang Chok practice.
Oh. 155.
Okay, what is Chang Chok? The Buddhist teachings offer comprehensive instructions about how to put the awareness of cause, condition, and effect into practice. Fundamentally, cause, condition, and effect never stray from the essence of shunyata. As Buddha said, everything is cause and condition, and the most powerful of all causes and conditions is your intention, your mind. A skeptical modern mind that is ambivalent about the vast and infinite manifestations of cause and condition will very likely harbor quite a few doubts about Chang Chok rituals. Those of you whose mind is as innocent and naive as a child's will be able to enjoy and admire a sandcastle as if it were real. A sophisticated, mature, calculating adult mind is more likely to dismiss the sandcastle out of hand, because what an adult mind wants is the quote unquote real thing. If your mind is flexible enough to be fully satisfied by a sandcastle, so-called death could be as simple as walking out of one room and into another. It will therefore be easy for someone like you to simply call out to a dead person and ask them to come back so you can tell them what they need to know. This is how tantric practitioners think. As they trust shunyata and understand the laws of cause, condition, and effect, they're able to make use of a very simple method, one of the Vajrayana's infinite methods, for summoning the dead person's mind consciousness to where the Chang Chok ritual is taking place. What we do in a Chang Chok ritual is summon the dead person's mind consciousness to an effigy that has been drawn on a piece of paper with the seed syllable Nri at its center. The The name of the dead person is written on the same piece of paper, along with as many other names of the dead as you wish. From the space of bodhicitta, the tantrika who is performing the ritual arises in the form of the deity of the specific practice they are doing. For example, Avalokiteshvara or Amitabha. The tantrika summons the spirit of the dead person or people and performs the rituals of taking refuge in the bodhisattva vow, then gives them the appropriate teachings, and most important of all, an abhisheka. After making a final offering of sensory pleasure objects, the consciousness of the dead person is transferred into the heart of the principal deity of the mandala, Avalokiteshvara or Amitabha. This is the structure of the Korwa Dongdruk, Chogyur Lingpa's Chang Chok. There are many other good short Chang Chok purifications to choose from, but you must first receive the appropriate empowerment before practicing them. Ask the person who gives you the empowerment for the teachings about how to do the practice and for a copy of the practice text. If you have yet to receive the empowerment or you're not a tantric practitioner, you could ask a qualified lama, monk, nun, or friend to perform the practice for your dead friend or loved one. And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that you want to help someone by requesting such rituals indicates that through you, the dead person has an indirect link with the Dharma. So use that link as the foundation from which to request rituals to be performed for their benefit and for engaging in all forms of virtuous action. So I've been asked to say a few things about the Chang Chok ritual and Korwa Dongdruk based on my experience in leading the Korwa Dongdruk for StAubyn in Australia, which I've been doing for the last couple of years after a year or two of co-facilitating the practice in Hong Kong. And I really have to say that I just love it more and more each time I do it, which is true of many sadhanas. And I feel very honored to be here to share with you what I've come to understand, though there are certainly more qualified people in our Sangha and beyond who could speak to its profundity. One of the most wonderful things about this practice is that it incorporates so much of what we're discussing today into one activity. So Rinpoche has obviously given an excellent summary of what happens during a Chang Chok ritual, and keeping in mind that this is a practice that requires an empowerment, I'll just parse it out a little bit more and try to give everyone a better idea about where it fits into all of the various ways that we can benefit the deceased. So just to be clear, Rinpoche did just say this, but based on a question raised last week about the relationship between Chang Chok and Korwa Dongdruk, Korwa Dongdruk is itself a Chang Chok ritual. Chang Chok literally means name inscription or name card ritual. And there are many such rituals, but Korwa Dongdruk is the one that's connected to and usually practiced by the Khyentse lineage, and is the one that Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche is encouraging us to do by offering the empowerment. So what Rinpoche outlined is typical of most Chang Chok rituals in general, as well as Korwa Dongdruk specifically. And some sources say that it's preferable to do this practice within 49 days when the attachment to the body is strongest. And earliest typically to do this practice would be about day 3 when the bardo of becoming is approximated to begin. But of course, timing is just a guideline, and this practice can be done at any time. At StAubyn in Australia, we do it once a month for 3 months for each person. So the name itself, Korwa Dongdruk, is a really good indication of what the goal of this practice is, meaning he who churns the depths of samsara. Korwa Dongdruk is a youthful and red form of Avalokiteshvara, who many of us know is the Bodhisattva of compassion. Throughout the book and actually throughout all Dharma teachings, we are reminded, Dharma teachings, we're reminded again and again that there are numerous opportunities for us, whether living or dead, to attain liberation. And here with this practice, we're really trying to create another one of those opportunities. So by churning the depths of samsara, Avalokiteshvara messes with the predictable and painful and cyclical patterns of our existence and messes with this likelihood of us being reborn yet again into one of the 6 samsaric realms. And so by reaching out to the deceased while they're in the bardo, we interrupt whatever is going on for them and we create another opportunity for liberation. So the tantrika, who arises as Avalokiteshvara, will summon the dead person's mind consciousness, which again is said to be roaming around the bardo in anxiety and confusion, to an effigy that is drawn on a piece of paper, as Rinpoche says, with the seed syllable Nri at its center. So here you can see the Nri at the center. In the case of Korwa Dongdruk, this is, of course, what the name card looks like. There is writing on both sides of the name card, and the name of the deceased is written about here, and there are several mantras and prayers. Just to give you an idea, this particular prayer down here on the back says something along the lines of, may all the elements or consciousnesses or aggregates of the deceased become the nature of the transformed 5 wisdoms. May they become the peaceful and wrathful deities of the 5 families, as well as their consorts, and may they merge inseparably with the absolutely perfect Buddhas. So you can see in this practice that we are really concentrating on merging the deceased with their enlightened nature. And Rinpoche, as we read, very specifically stresses how important it is to keep one's mind open to the potential of this practice and to participate out of love for those we are hoping to benefit. One of the things that is so beautiful about this practice is that it is so clearly and obviously about focusing on the other. For example, Vajrayana practitioners might use specific seed syllables as a means to stabilize and internalize our greatest expression of the 4 immeasurables, those being love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And in this case, the seed syllables are used to lure the deceased to the name card. So essentially, in a sort of forcefully but gentle way, we use love and compassion to pull the deceased from their illusory place of fear and confusion and towards the space of love and safety that we have created for them. So Khenpo Kartar, he says that we make the symbolic expression of love to hook the deceased, to draw them towards the name card. And then we visualize a lasso of compassion to strongly compel the deceased to be with us. And then we sort of forcefully impose a joyousness upon them to ensure that they stay in the name card while we assist them. And then finally, we use the sound of impartiality so that the deceased feels, as he says, such comfort and delight that they choose to remain in the name card for the rest of the practice. So you can really feel that underlying this practice is the most earnest desire to help others. And the more you dig into the sadhana, the more you see the beauty and richness and altruistic intention in each and every line. So now that we're fully confident that the deceased is with us or with you, if you're doing the practice, they are offered, as Rinpoche mentioned, refuge and bodhicitta and teachings that point out the empty nature of what they're experiencing in the bardo and beyond. And then we offer them an initiation as Red Avalokiteshvara. And once this has taken place, they're given a sur or smoke offering so they can enjoy the smells of all that they would normally have enjoyed through taste and other sensory organs when they had had a form body. In the Korwa Dongdruk, this tour is sometimes likened to a farewell party, celebrating the fact that the deceased is about to finally leave samsara for a much better life in the enlightened realm of Amitabha. We've already heard and will continue to hear more about smoke offerings, but my point in mentioning it here is to show that one of the standalone methods for benefiting the deceased is also incorporated into this name inscription practice. Rinpoche also mentions that the consciousness of the dead person is transferred into the heart of the principal deity of the mandala, which in this case is from the deceased as Red Avalokiteshvara into the heart of Amitabha. And this is, of course, itself a form of poa, which we've already heard a lot about from Choktrul Khandro and will continue to hear about throughout this course. So here we have yet another method for benefiting the deceased right here woven into this practice. And at the end of the practice, we burn the name inscription cards, which indicate that the flames of primordial wisdom have liberated the deceased into the enlightened realm. And at Siddhartha's intent, we do this after we've performed the practice 3 times for any one individual. And then we mix these ashes, the ashes of the name cards, with the torma, and we make it into tsatsa. Tsatsa molds in the shape of a stupa. So here again, we have yet another method for benefiting the deceased woven into the practice, and that being the method of making tsatsas. This, by the way, will be referenced again and discussed at length in future sessions. So you can see here that this practice is almost like combining 4 practices at the very least into one practice. So though I've really only gone over what Rinpoche has mentioned in the book, I hope you can really see what an incredible practice this is for so many reasons. It's beautiful, it's incredibly well-intentioned, it's succinct, and it incorporates so many of the recommended means and techniques for benefiting the deceased.
Thanks, Sarah. It's really great to get some more explanation. When we do the practice together each month, there's not the time, so really wonderful that you could sort of break that down a little bit more. Thank you. So there'll be room for questions and answers, as always, at the end. So you can put them in the box already if you've got some bubbling. We'll now return to the top of page 164, where Rinpoche says, you could also make light offerings in the name of the dead person at holy places like Bodh Gaya. If you prefer, you could make incense or flower offerings and so on. You could also practice life release, excuse me, page 203, and we'll be practicing Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo's sadhana of life release in the last session of Living is Dying, which is currently scheduled for November the 13th. Rinpoche goes on to say, you can also make light offerings of butter lamps or candles. Vow to be vegetarian, ideally for a lifetime, but at least for a specific period. Commission, buy or construct statues or paintings of Buddha Amitayus or Aryatara, or build a temple. Then Rinpoche reminds us, if we wish, as we read the instructions or do the pujas, we can include the names of other dead people who might benefit from this information and blessings. Rinpoche also includes here the practices of Poa and Sir offering, which Duk Khandro spoke about previously, and I'll read Rinpoche's advice from the book. Tibetans usually ask a lama or monk or nun to do Poa for someone who has just died. But would a Poa ritual help if a person who died wasn't spiritual? The Vajrayana teachings state that the tantric method of Poa helps whether the dead person was spiritual or not, but that the ritual will have more power if the person who organizes it has a strong conviction and trust in the practice. If you're a Buddhist, the fact that you're showing concern for the spiritual well-being of the dead person and are willing to organize rituals and practices for their benefit shows that they had a connection with this path, so use that connection. There's no reason why such rituals should not be performed anonymously. Anonymous help is often the best kind. These days, money is given to charities and trusts that pass it on to the needy, who rarely even know the names of their benefactors, let alone meet them. Sir offering. Traditionally, Sir practice is performed every day for 3 days after death, or for a week, or at best, every day for 49 days. And we're going to go back to page 141 to look at the Sir offering. Here Rinpoche gives a simple Sir offering practice, so I'll just read through. Sir is a traditional ritual for the dead. Approximately 3 days after death, the relatives and friends of the person who died burn vegetarian food as a Sir offering. Tibetans burn roasted barley, but you can buy any kind of vegetarian food you like. A biscuit, a piece of bread will do. Visualize the smoke of the Sir offering as an infinite abundance of wealth, food, drink, shelter, transport, and so on. Multiply and bless the offerings, then dedicate the merit towards the well-being of the dead person and all sentient beings. Ideally, visualize yourself as Avalokiteshvara or whichever peaceful deity you prefer. The Bardo being will be shaky, nervous, and afraid, so visualize yourself as a peaceful and very compassionate deity to help create a calming atmosphere. Recite Om Ahum a few times and sprinkle water to bless the offerings. When you practice, if for any reason you're unable to read the text out loud, read it silently instead. O son or daughter of noble family, we say the name of the dead person, eat this food until you are full. Enjoy everything that is offered to your heart's content. Do not crave life. Do not yearn for those you have left behind. Think instead of your guru. Think of the deity. Think of the pure realms of the Buddhas. Think of the Buddha realm where the Buddha of limitless light, Buddha Amitabha, dwells, and repeat Buddha Amitabha's name again and again. If you prefer a slightly more elaborate practice, Choling Tersa Sir practice is very easy to do, and an English translation is freely available for download from Lotsawa House. Also included in the Living is Dying resources for this session is a text of White Soy offering that pervades all pure lands by Jigme Lingpa. Zomzo Khyentse Rinpoche gave the transmission for this Sir practice at the end of the Bardo teachings in Deer Park, May 24th, 2022. So we now have several options for offering Sir, which is something we can actually do to help not only people we know who have passed, but also when we see disasters on the news, people drowned in floods or killed in wars. We often feel helpless in this situation, but Sir is something we can do to help. So I'm going to skip the next 2 sections on practice of life release and making sasas, as we'll be dedicating future sessions to these. We continue with the commemoration. Rinpoche says, most Western cultures have developed their own traditions for commemorating and memorializing the dead. In much of Europe, for example, the dead are laid to rest in beautiful graveyards under ornately carved tombstones, which family and friends can then visit when they want to think about loved ones and offer flowers. I am told that some people keep their dead loved ones' ashes at home in an urn. One of the most famous of all commemorations is the Taj Mahal in India, built by a Mughal emperor for his beloved first wife. Whether you commemorate your loved one according to your own cultural traditions is up to you. But if you would like to follow the Buddhist tradition, you could commission statues of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the name of the dead person, or print and frame a photo of a Buddha, or commission a painting. Whichever option you can afford. Buddhists tend to commission paintings of Buddha Amitabha's realm, Sukhavati, or Guru Rinpoche's copper-coloured mountain, or Akshobhya Buddha. Commissioned sacred art serves 2 purposes. It is a wonderful memorial for the dead, and it also accumulates merit. Tsering's going to share something with us.
Lady sponsored the beautiful Buddha statue at Vajradhara Gompa in memory of her husband who had passed. And the statue, we can see, has been shared alongside the text. This statue inspired so many people. So all that merit was generated for her late husband, and as well. Many people benefited. Back in May, in our session on wills and funerals, Julie StAubyn covered the funeral process in detail, and Annie and Julie have given more information in this session. I'd like to add a little more information here on how we can arrange a Buddhist funeral. We are fortunate that Dudjom Rinpoche saw the need for a short cremation ceremony to be written for Westerners, after seeing that in some countries people were burning the dead like logs without any ritual of cremation or purification. And this is quoted from Dudjom Rinpoche's colophon of the practice. This practice is easy to follow, and we usually combine it with the Sukhavati prayer and aspiration. The liturgy will be included in the resources on the website for this session, along with 2 other funeral ceremony liturgies written by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, a Sukhavati chant and the Sadhana of Mahamudra funeral liturgy. Some crematoriums have a small viewing room beside the oven where this cremation practice can also take place. If this isn't possible, it's also fine to do the cremation ceremony in the crematorium chapel, or in the deceased person's home, or in your home, or in a Buddhist center or shrine room. Any other mantras, prayers, or readings from Buddhist masters, such as Longchenpa or Thich Nhat Hanh, can be added according to what the deceased may have requested. Some Vajrayana groups have their own information available on practical instructions and practices for Buddhist funerals. We don't have a booklet or manual available as yet. However, you're welcome to contact the Living as Dying team members if you need help with this. And now we return to the book. Offer the dead person's belongings. We covered back in May during our session on wills. So I'll just ask Annie Zangmo to read this again to refresh our memory.
Thanks, Tsering. After a Buddhist has died, try to leave their belongings untouched for 3 days. If the relatives agree, everything should then be offered to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, to philanthropic endeavours, to charities that work to protect the environment, to organisations trying to eradicate child prostitution and child labour, or whichever cause was close to the dead person's heart. Buddhists traditionally make offerings to 2 fields of merit: the Buddhas, bodhisattvas and sublime beings, and sentient beings, humans, animals and so on. Ideally, try to make offerings to both fields of merit. Although the practice has begun to die out, in some parts of East Bhutan, the corpse is informed by a family member or friend before any of their belongings are given away. For example, saying, "Today I will give your cup to the local monastery," or "I will give your pen to the local school." It's a good idea. This practice is well worth considering. If for any reason there is no corpse, write the dead person a letter telling them what you intend to do, then leave it on their desk for a day or 2, or by their armchair, or wherever they like to sit. We now come to Rinpoche's advice on repaying karmic debts. Deluded, ignorant beings like you and me are subject to karma and are therefore victims of karmic debt. Everything that happens to us in life and death, our successes, failures, even the manner of our death, happens as a result of our karmic debts. Basically, causes and conditions dictate everything we do. So one of the activities we could initiate on behalf of the dead loved one is a karmic debt clearing ritual. What is karmic debt? On paper, you own a flat, a car, wardrobes full of clothes, and expensive accessories. Yet if everything you own was acquired with borrowed money, technically, all your worldly goods belong to the bank. Karmic debt works pretty much the same way. Everything we are, our situation in life, our health, our wealth, and even our appearance, is based on countless lifetimes of interaction with others. The Buddhist teachings tell us that we are therefore karmically indebted to absolutely everyone. Every single sentient being has at one time been our father, mother, child, maid, driver, the horse or donkey we have ridden, our best friend and our worst enemy. As you read this book, you could be sitting on a spot that belongs to a ghost. Did you ask the ghost permission to sit there? We build houses without giving a second thought to the many animals that will be turned out of their homes as a result. We owe an unrepayable debt to our teachers, nurses, doctors, leaders and countries, and to our police forces for keeping us safe and bringing those who steal from and hurt us to justice. Some people don't pay taxes on principle, yet they benefit from the security their country provides to live comfortably and securely. If you are one of those people, you owe your country's social system far more than those who participate in paying their taxes. All these karmic debts are the reason we experience sickness, family feuds and failure. And because we are all burdened with a colossal amount of karmic debt, we have almost no control over what we do, think, have and how we live. Today you may be healthy, bright and energetic, but in a split second, a stupid accident could wipe out all your health and energy for good. Is there an antidote to karmic debt? Yes. A general antidote that is also very effective is to create good karma. There is no end of ways for creating and accumulating good karma, from donating a penny to a world ecology program to volunteering to teach maths to child prostitutes in Cambodia. But according to the Buddhist teachings, the best remedy for karmic debt is to practice the Dharma. Take refuge, make the Bodhisattva vow and practice bodhicitta. You could also do Tonglen practice. As you breathe out, offer everything that is good to others, and as you breathe in, hoover up everything that is bad. Sunma Gosha and I will be guiding you through the Tonglen practice in the Living is Dying session on October the 9th. And always dedicate the merit you accumulate towards the enlightenment of others. If you can, you should also offer sentient beings some practical help. Build stupas, statues of the Buddha, support those who study and practice Dharma, and make the Dharma available to as many people as possible. These are all very powerful methods for wiping out your karmic debt. If you are a Tantrika and have received the necessary empowerments and teachings, you could try some of the Vajrayana's excellent karmic debt clearing techniques like Sur Pujas, Sun Pujas.
Almost at the end. She's going to talk a little bit.
Sorry, you're unmuted. Sun Pujas and water offering pujas. And we'll be practicing the water offering puja together in Living is Dying on October the 30th. Latsun Namkhan Chikme's Mountain Smoke Offering, Ruwa Sangsho, arranged by Dudjom Rinpoche, is available for download from Lotsawa House. All these virtuous activities are so important. Ruwa Sangsho is indeed an amazing practice and something we can practice on a daily basis so we don't accumulate too much karmic debt. You can join the weekly Ruwa Sangsho practice after Siddhartha's Intent Australia morning meditation each Sunday at 8 a.m. It's also an easy practice to do at home. If you would like more information on doing the Ruwa Sangsho, you are welcome to contact myself or Jakob. We're planning to also do a full Ruwa Sangsho puja online with a small fire and offerings before the close of the Living is Dying program. So that's the end of the book sharing I should say, and I'm going to have a look at the questions in the chat. There were already some questions earlier, so I'll just read those and the answers, but if you have any further questions or you would like to raise your hand, please do, and maybe say who you'd like to direct the question to. So I'll just read what we have so far. So a few little things have gone on. There was a question, will the scarf all be buried or cremated along with the deceased? This was when Annie was talking about adding something to the person's body. I don't know if that got answered yet, because then we go on to washing. Annie, did you already answer that?
I did, but really it's up to you, because it's not always burnt or buried with the person. It's sometimes just when you accompany them and then you take it back, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes people want that to go with the body. Then you should instruct the funeral directors that we want this to be buried or cremated.
Great.
With that person.
Thank you. And then Belle asked some questions. Are bodies automatically washed unless one specifies they don't wish that? If one dies in hospital, is the body washed, and how soon after death and by whom, if it's not a loved one? If one specifies one doesn't want washing within the first few hours, if one's at home or in palliative care, should that be specifically mentioned in an advanced care plan? Is there a specific way one wants to be washed, and by whom should that be mentioned? For Buddhist people dying, what is taught about washing? So some of that I know has already been covered, and also it's in the document that is shared about Annie's ritual. But I'm also going to read what Annie put in the chat box. Bodies are not automatically washed. If handling is required, at a minimum, please let the facility know well beforehand. I have found that they are usually very honouring about people's wishes and beliefs. So a question from Belle. When Tsering was mentioning sponsoring pujas for the dead, Mr. Pema Wangchok wasn't mentioned as a contact. And Rinpoche's monk can do pujas. Is there more info on this in the files, and such as the contact details and which monasteries? So I'm going to ask Tsering to answer that in a minute. I'll just finish it. So can this also be written clearly in the will? Also, if we want Korwa Dongdruk performed by SIA after we die, what is the best way to organise? So Tsering, would you like to just say about the details for contacting Mr. Pema Wangchok and the details for the monasteries?
Yes, well, Pema Wangchok will arrange with the monasteries. We don't need to do that. And he arranges the payments and so forth of the offering. And we just communicate with him. So I can put that contact detail in the resources for this session.
Great.
And with the Korwa Dongdruk, I think if you put in your care plan, name someone who's going to add your name to the list, to the Siddhartha's intent list to have the practice done, that would probably be the best way.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, thank you. I just need to take a photo or something. So any further questions while we have our wonderful panel of people here? I'm just going to have a little look if anyone's got their hand up. No other burning questions coming through? Okay. I think Belle covered them for us, which was great.
Yes. Yes, so we might dedicate the merit. This virtuous accumulation of merit we offer, so that all obstacles dissolve, and at the time of our death each of us may find ease in dying, and swift rebirth in the pure land of great bliss, quickly gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. If the material presented today has raised any concerns for you, if suggested you speak with a trusted friend, your personal health professional, or your Buddhist teacher or instructor. And next week, we are excited to announce our guest speakers will be Khandro Trunli Chodon and Jenna McBeath for discussions on Chapter 14, questions about other aspects of death. It'd be good to read through the first section on grief and loss beforehand, as Khandro will be speaking from her own experience, and we won't be screen sharing the text for that first part of the session. And next week, daylight saving will be in effect for those of us in New South Wales, ACT and Victoria, with Queensland still on the usual Australian Eastern Standard Time. As we are transmitting from New South Wales, please check the time for your state or country to make sure you are joining at 5:30 p.m. Sydney, Australia, Daylight Saving Time. So we look forward to seeing you then on Daylight Saving Time. And thank you so much again to our guest speakers and their wonderful presentations. It really is just so helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Ilaria, you had your hand up and then it went down. Do you want to ask a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask something very quickly. When washing somebody's body, I was told not to touch the head and the feet, because touching the feet will bring them to lower realm, according to some Tibetan tradition. And touching the head, I don't know for what reason, is not a good thing to do. So I wonder if Annie can spare some thought on it. I mean, that's what I was taught. I've been practicing for 5 years now, Gelugpa school. So I don't know if applies in any Buddhist tradition or is just specifically in this one.
If you have a specific tradition to actually follow that ritual, and to, if you're dying in a hospital, palliative care or nursing home, to let people know beforehand that this will be the ritual, this is what will be expected. I have been with people when they've had the pawa by Lama, and then soon after that we can do the washing of the body. So it just depends. But if this is what your wish is, wonderful, you know, let people know well beforehand.
Okay, it's not actually my wish. I wanted just to know if it's true that you are not supposed to be touching head or feet. Yeah, but it's okay. Thank you.
Oh, well,
Many thanks.
there are no rigid rules. It just depends. So you're talking about a Buddhist practitioner, aren't you?
Yes, I had a friend who actually died at home of breast cancer, and she didn't want the morphine. So, you know, we had to struggle with the doctor to actually take her off the morphine because she wanted to die lucid. And yes, and one of her wishes was to stay at home. So we had to organize all the ice and things to come and fight with fight for her, really, because yeah, one of her wishes was not to, according to the tradition that she followed, which I believe it was Gelugpa, not to touch her head or feet. So that's what we did for her. But I was wondering whether it was a general Buddhist rule not to touch head and feet for 3 days.
Well, Sarah, I don't know if you'd like to say something about this, but just from my experience, families and groups of people can be intermingled with their beliefs. So whereas one person may have a particular belief, no, you don't touch the head, then another person would say, well, yes, I want to touch that. I want to wash the hands. Or so when I go in, depending on the situation, I will just respect their wishes and make it as smooth as possible. Because the last thing I want to do to someone is to say, no, you can't do that. That's not allowed.
Of
Or you
course.
shouldn't do that. I don't
Of
think
course.
that's an appropriate place to speak like.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. That's it. Our questions are complete. Sarah?
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Okay.